Despite the abundant cultural differences between our families, no one in either Julia's Italian family or my Swiss family is capable of simply saying goodbye and walking out the door. Instead, we have these elaborate, if unwritten and unspoken, farewell rituals that we go through. This is true on our formal family holiday gatherings, and it's true if it was just a casual Saturday afternoon party. Our ritual begins with the initial goodbye phase, where we circulate around the room or around the house and say, we offer some culturally appropriate signs of affection and goodbye to our family members, and we say goodbye to all of our aunts and cousins as if we were actually leaving. And that transitions into the, did I tell you about phase of goodbyes, where a family member tells us a 10-minute story that they really should have told us about 2.5 hours ago. And then we eventually say our goodbyes to all of those stories, and we edge towards the front door where we enter into the, why don't you take some of this phase of the gathering? Leftover food magically appears as if Jesus himself is in the kitchen multiplying food and putting it in Tupperwares and sending it forth to feed the hungry people, and we get fully loaded down before we could even touch the front door, and now loaded down with sufficient food, we enter the ceremonial opening of the front door phase of the goodbyes, where we say goodbye again, and we physically open the front door to the house. And this is a sign to the remaining family members to come over to us and tell us a 10-minute story that they really should have told us a couple hours ago, and to see if we have sufficient food before we actually step out of the door. And eventually we get out the door and we begin the conversation at the car phase of the goodbye. And so we're walking or we're standing or we're sitting in the car with the engine running, and they are still talking. And we are still saying goodbye to each other. And finally we drive away. And we enter into the wait for the text message phase, in which we're informed that someone had another thing that they meant to tell us but forgot, or that they didn't know that we were leaving, or that we should have taken more food. Now, I suspect it's not just Julia and my families that do these goodbye rituals. There are times, admittedly, that I wish that we could just yell, like, "We're leaving," and go. But usually that goodbye ritual is oddly comforting. It's its own mysterious way. It brings this sense of peace to us. And I am fully a willing participant in these farewells. Jesus' farewell discourse in John's Gospel spans 4 entire chapters of the Gospel. More than 10% of John's Gospel is dedicated to Jesus saying goodbye, and the stories that he tells the people about it, and the journey that they're going to take with him. And it's all dedicated to watching him not so much get out the door and into the car, but getting out of the tomb and how he's going to ascend to God. And it's just a super long process to say goodbye. He'd fit right in with our families. The Bible is filled with these goodbye moments. And each one comes at us kind of differently. The Good Samaritan takes care of a mugged traveler. And he pays the innkeeper for services and says goodbye and promises that he'll come back to the inn and care for the wounded man. This is an "I'll be back, goodbye." And that's probably familiar to a lot of us, where we leave, but we just know in the core of our being that someday we are going to be back to this beloved place, or this beloved ministry, or this beloved person. Goodbye, but I will be back. Or in Genesis, Lot, who is one of the Bible's good guys, is fleeing his town with his family. He's a refugee. His town is being wiped off the face of the earth, and he is forced to say goodbye because of events that were way beyond his control. In an act of divine providence, the Lord tells Lot to say goodbye but never look back, lest he crystallize, lest he turn into a pillar of salt, by seeing the destruction of his hometown. Perhaps that feeling of goodbye feels familiar too, where a trauma or a danger or a fear just makes it impossible to ever look back and to say goodbye. We instead say our goodbye as our eyes are focused fully straight ahead on what will come next. Adam and Eve say goodbye also in Genesis to the Garden of Eden. They have been tricked. They are tricked. And once they have seen both good and evil, they can never see the world the same way that they did when they only knew it as good. And they say goodbye to their innocence, even as God promises to be with them in what we would simply call the reality of life. We know what it's like to say goodbye to our innocence, too. To never be the same. It's not just a childhood thing. This happens to us throughout life. We begin a new profession, and we expect to find other people who are just as passionate and excited and professional about our new work as we are. And over time, we discover the reality of hospital systems, of crop failures, of people who cut corners, of folks who fudge statistics, or people who cherry-pick clients, and we witness implicit and explicit systemic biases. The garden is good. We know the garden is good. But we also know bad bosses and insubordinate employees. And we say goodbye to our innocent view of the world. Mind you, that's church, too, where we visit a church and we're dazzled by the perfect garden, and we believe that everything is perfect at First Church. But over time, we say goodbye to that innocence, too, because only God is all good. But God will always be with us in the reality of our lives. These goodbyes in the Bible, they come out of the blue. Saul is blindsided. He never saw it coming. He's knocked off his high horse. And this singular event caused him to say goodbye to his long-held beliefs and embrace this new vision of the world. He said goodbye to a former life, and he took a new name of Paul. And he apologized, and he repented for his hate-filled beliefs. And he came to terms with some of the harm that he had caused. And then he committed himself to this new ministry of being the best messenger of Christ's love that he could ever be. And again, maybe that just feels a little familiar, where we have this unexpected life event that forces us to say goodbye to something that we never thought we would let go of. And we release a former stance or attitude or belief, and we look at it and are filled with pain and regret, and we seek our forgiveness, and then we dedicate our lives to a new and better journey. 10% of John's gospel is for Jesus' goodbye, more than 10%. And his goodbye draws a little bit from all of those. Goodbye, and I'll be back. Goodbye, and I'll never look back. Goodbye, innocence. I'll never be the same. Goodbye, former life. I promise to do better, to be better. It draws a little bit from all of that, and yet it's its own thing. Goodbye. You can do this. All the things I did. Actually, you can do greater works than I did. Goodbye, and you will love what happens next. You will remember our time together with joy. You will learn new things. Goodbye. Peace I leave with you. Peace I give to you. You will not be afraid, and you will not be troubled. Goodbye. An indescribable spirit will fill your lives with the presence of God, as if I never left at all. Jesus' farewell discourse just goes on and on and on. Kind of like my family's goodbyes. He is building these rituals that we still use in church and we still use in our lives. His goodbye is about reassuring and comforting his disciples. His goodbye encourages and empowers them. They can do this. And they can do greater things, even when he's gone. His goodbye promises them that God's enlivening spirit will move through them and show them new visions that they never thought would have been possible of the good news. His goodbye focuses on peace, an eternal peace which moves us from fear to celebration. Jesus' goodbye, you see, is the welcoming and the birth of the church, enacted on the day of Pentecost, as wind and tongues of fire and the presence of the Holy Spirit appeared to the disciples. But it didn't end there. Jesus' goodbye is the birth of the church, which comes to be every time we reenact Jesus' rituals. Every time that we say goodbye, but we also reassure and comfort one another. Every time we encourage and empower someone. Every time we remember our past and anticipate our future. It is the birth of the church every time we promise new visions and live into new life. Every time we move from fear to celebration and seek in love to create the peace which passes our human understanding. We've been saying that goodbye for over 2,000 years. It takes a long time. We develop elaborate church rituals to go with it. But it turns out that Jesus' long goodbye is simply our beginning. Amen.